know it's tempting to blame everything on the pandemic and school closures, but if we really take an honest look at the research, the children have been suffering for some time.
This episode is sponsored by Therapy Notes, therapynotes.com. Be sure and check them out, and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Folks, it's Gordon, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast. This is episode number 299. Can you believe it? We're at 299 episodes, and episode 300 is coming up. And so, little teaser, got a special guest, or special to me anyway. The one and only Mike Michalowicz is going to be on that episode with me. But in this episode, I'm looking forward to you hearing my conversation with Teva Johnstone. And Teva and I jump into this whole topic of, what we're noticing and what we're seeing around this, the whole phenomenon of the pandemic and how it's affecting children. I think it's an interesting time to live through. And, I think all of us are seeing just a whole way of thinking about things, either pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, and how it's affected us in our work and what we're seeing with our clients, and in particularly those of you that might be working with children. And what I love about what Teva is doing is really looking at working with parents. I know in my own career, early on in my career as a therapist, I worked for a nonprofit organization that worked mainly with at-risk children and youth. And my job as a therapist in that organization was doing intensive in-home therapy. We were using a model called multi-systemic therapy back in the day, but really most of it was focused on doing more work with the parents than the actual kids. Because if you think about it, particularly in the counseling and therapy world, we can make a difference doing individual therapy with kids or working with kids directly. But really, if you think about it, particularly for younger kids, the biggest impact is going to be the environment around them and being able to create change or be a catalyst for change in that environment. So anyway, I want you to hear from Teva and this kind of, and on the business side of things, just a different approach and how she's incorporating, coaching with parents and all of that into her practice. So stay tuned for that conversation. But before we get to my conversation with Teva, I'd love for you to check out the new resource that we've put together. Big shout out to my assistant, Rachel, and the work that she's done on this particular resource. And it is a set of Instagram templates that you can use for your practice Instagram pages. And they are templates that are created in Canva. Canva is a free tool that you can use, but you can take these templates and plug in your logo or your practice information, and it's 50 different templates or posts that you can do and schedule them throughout the year. So I'd invite you to go over to practiceoftherapy.com/Insta templates. And you can find out more about that. It's a great resource. And I think for those of you that are active on Instagram, Rachel does a great job in helping me keep my Instagram posts out there for the practice of therapy. We put together these templates for you, and they're very reasonably priced. You can get them for just $22. So and then get lifetime use of them. So be sure and check that out. practiceoftherapy.com/Insta posts, and you can get access to those templates. And also, real quickly, before we get to my conversation with Teva, also want to let you know about another resource and another kind of endeavor that I've been assisting in. I've got a good friend. Her name is Ashley, and she has put together an Etsy store that is really focused on mental health and just some swag and T-shirts and things that are promoting mental health and the whole mental health matters theme. Also T-shirts around recovery and kind of inspirational things. And she's also put together several designs that are specifically for therapists and social workers and counselors. And it's some really cute stuff. But anyway, if you'll go over to practiceoftherapy.com, mental health wear, WEAR, you can get access to that store. And I've been helping her get that set up and wanted to give a shout out to her and helping her promote this. So check it out. It's got some cool stuff there. And then again, before we get to my conversation with Teva, I'd love for you to hear from one of the members of the Psychcraft Network, one of the other great podcasts out there, along with a message from our sponsor of the podcast, Therapy Notes.
Hey there, I'm Chris McDonald, and if you don't know me yet, I'm host of the Holistic Counseling Podcast, which is for therapists who want to deepen their knowledge of holistic modalities and build their practice with confidence. The Holistic Counseling Podcast is proudly part of the Psychcraft Podcast Network, a network of podcasts focused on helping people live more meaningful and productive lives. Join me each week as we explore the best practices for integrating holistic approaches into therapy and delve into the many benefits. Whether you're looking for new techniques or seeking to deepen your own personal journey towards wellness, this podcast is the perfect companion for your holistic path. If you haven't listened yet, you can find it over at holisticcounselingpodcast.com and discover other resources, including products, books, and other trainings to help support you in your holistic journey.
Have you ever wished your private practice could run as smoothly as a well-oiled machine? Well, look no further, because Therapy Notes is here to revolutionize your practice. Therapy Notes is the complete practice management system you've been dreaming of. With everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with clients remotely, create rich documentation, and handle insurance billing, it's your secret weapon for a smoother practice. And the best part? It's accessible wherever and whenever you need it. Yep, even on the go. Imagine having more time for what truly matters, your clients. It's like having an extra set of hands, but digital. And here's the kicker. It's the very EHR Gordon relies on in his own practice. So, you know it's the real deal. Say goodbye to paperwork nightmares and hello to more time and better quality care. Check out Therapy Notes today at practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. Oh, and don't forget to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free. That's practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes with the promo code GORDON. Enjoy the show.
Well, hello, folks, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm really looking forward to you getting to hear from Teva Johnstone. Welcome, Teva.
Thank you, Gordon. Thanks for having me on.
Yes. And so we were chatting a little bit ahead of time. I don't know that this is necessarily a topic we've covered on the podcast before, but I know you're going to be interested in this, and this just around, children's mental health and just being able to help parents with all of those issues, particularly parents that homeschool. But
Mhm.
Teva, as I start with everyone, tell folks a little bit more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed.
Sure. So I am a licensed clinical social worker in the state of California. I have been a social worker for just about a decade now. I'd have to go through and count again, but close to a decade if we include graduate school where, we do our social work internships and our therapy practice learning. So I have worked with kids and adolescents and parents the entire time I've been in this work. And some of the practice settings I've worked in are school-based therapy on IEP teams and just general counseling as well, private group practice, foster care, and I had my own private clinical practice for a while as well.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
great. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so how did I land here where I am now?
Mm-hmm.
The pandemic hit.
Mm-hmm.
I was working at a private group practice, seeing children with developmental trauma. And I also had a leg in school-based therapy at that time. And, just everything shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So everything was switched to remote. And seeing kids remotely is a lot like herding cats.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not effective, if we're being totally honest. Teens, you can work with it, but kids, not so much. So I really had to reevaluate the direction I was going with my career, which was always to open an in-person child practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I got licensed at a time when everyone was literally walking away from their in-person offices. So it wasn't a time to lease an office. So I tried having an in-person home practice a virtual home practice for a while, seeing kids for therapy. And I ended up closing it and pivoting because it's not effective work. And working with parents is really, really where the change, in my opinion, is most long lasting and just most solid. So I pivoted to seeing parents virtually. And because I built quite a following on Instagram, parents from all over the country and really all over the world were interested in consulting with me and working with me. So I opened a coaching practice that allowed me to see parents outside of California in a non-clinical fashion.
Yeah. That's I think that's something that is important that people hear from me all the time is that I think a lot of us in this field, particularly as mental health providers, really need to recognize that we have a lot of knowledge and skills and just wisdom that translates in other ways, and that we don't necessarily have to do it the traditional butt and chair, one-to-one kind of counseling and therapy with folks.
It's
and
true.
That there are a lot of other ways that are probably even more effective, truthfully, than doing things in that way.
I agree. So it's been an exciting pivot. It's definitely, a learning curve because there really isn't a map for therapists who branch away from the traditional model. So it's been a learning process and kind of carving my own path, which has both been exciting and also just sometimes overwhelming and frustrating. But I wouldn't have it any other way. I love it.
Right. Yeah. So here we are, dare we say, post-pandemic, and I think that just really changed the way we think about mental health. In that, as I've said before here on the podcast, I think one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that it made it okay for people to talk about mental health, number one, and kind of ended some of the stigma with that. But I think what we also saw, as you've recognized, is that when you start pulling kids out of school and out of their social situations, it really has a huge effect on them.
It really does. Definitely. It really put into the spotlight. I think it put into the spotlight children's mental health, the pandemic, more than maybe we were talking about it before. And I know that I know it's tempting to blame everything on the pandemic and school closures, but if we really take an honest look at the research, the children have been suffering for some time before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of an onion. You just keep pulling back the layers and more is revealed. But
right.
but you're right. One silver lining is it put the discussion of mental health in general and also children's mental health in particular kind of on center stage, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So a question then becomes, what is it that you've learned about children's mental health and kind of what you see as, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, what we need to do about it and how you're working with that particular issue and what's led to it and all of that? I know that's a really broad question and you could probably talk for hours on that, but what are your thoughts on all of this?
Sure. So there are several key pieces, but I would say that I agree with Jonathan Haidt that one of the most significant drivers of the children's mental health crisis today is a phone-based childhood. And a phone-based childhood is detrimental for several reasons, but one of them is because children are not supposed to spend their formative years on a screen. They are supposed to be out playing, moving their bodies, engaging in normative social challenges, social joy, normative risk-taking. All of these things build children up to being resilient when things out of our control might happen to them, like, say, divorce or these various things that we know to be challenging for children. When children are built up living a developmentally normative childhood that is not on a screen, they are just more prepared to handle the challenges of life. And they're more socially adept to handle when things are disappointing and frustrating and angering and don't go their way. And what we're seeing today is children are spending, the CDC just released some data that they're spending between 6 and 9 hours a day on a screen for entertainment, meaning not educational purposes, not school, not online classes. And girls are posting pictures of themselves going through puberty and waiting for likes and all of this stuff. It's just so bad for them. It's so bad for them. Then the other piece, and this is connected to living a phone-based childhood, is the parenting culture has changed since about the late 90s, where parents now are very fearful of their children being kidnapped or harmed in some kind of way if they are out free playing in the neighborhood, like we grew up doing.
Right.
And I don't want to sound like I'm shaming parents, because we all live in this culture together, and I know what it is to be concerned about a young child. I do. But we are over-parenting. We are over-parenting, and it's not good for the children. So they're not out free playing. They're not engaging in these normative social experiences. They're glued to screens, and it's harmful.
Oh, yeah.
Frankly, it's harmful.
Yeah.
So these are some key factors in the children's mental health crisis. I would say it goes even further than that. I could just keep going on and rambling.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Are you sure?
This is good stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
It really is. Yeah.
Okay. So I follow the work closely of Dr. Peter Gray, who's an evolutionary psychologist. And his work is studying more traditional societies in how children learn through play and autonomy and risk-taking. And he is credited. He's not a founder of the unschooling movement by any means, but he is an advocate and proponent of allowing children to have more self-direction in their education and more autonomy, because we know that these things are important for human well-being, including children's well-being. The field of positive psychology points this out. We need autonomy. And so Dr. Peter Gray is an advocate for giving children more autonomy. And this really starts with the schools, with their education. And Dr. Gray highlights that prior to COVID and prior to the introduction of the smartphone and a phone-based childhood, the children were already suffering with increased depression and anxiety. He has been following the tragic suicide rates of children. And if you look, which are over 100% right now, since we introduced the smartphone for ages 10 to 14. And this is hard data based on attempted suicide, completed suicide, and ER visits for self-harm.
Wow.
And Dr. Peter Gray argues that school plays a huge role in this because of the more modern coercive nature of school. And I say modern because at the beginning of compulsory education in the United States, school was about 4 hours a day. And so we cannot compare it to today's school, which is 7 to 8 hours a day. So we're looking at a 40 plus hour a week sedentary job for children that follows them home. They can't even escape it. It follows them home with homework, 2 to 5 hours a night of homework. And then as the CDC just released, if they're not doing their homework, they're on a screen. So it's not just one factor. It's a complex multi-factor problem. And as therapists, we know that you can't just point to one thing.
Right.
But the suicide rate of children follows the school calendar. It significantly drops off in the summer, which is the opposite for adults. And it is near exact aligned to the school calendar, including taking pauses at spring break and winter break. And we're talking about completed suicide, not just the teacher noticed a risk of harm to self and then had the child admitted.
Wow. Yeah.
So school is a big part of this, I argue. I mean, I agree with Peter Gray.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. All of this, as you're talking about this, there are a couple of things that come to mind, and it's just really coincidental. I was listening to a podcast that I listen to fairly regularly. It's called Akimbo, and it's by Seth Godin.
Ooh, and I love Seth Godin, and I know that podcast.
Yes. And so it was a replay, and essentially the podcast was about what are schools for? And
yes, I've seen that.
And so he was saying that out of the Industrial Revolution, which has just kind of followed us, the purpose of schools was to teach compliance, not about how to learn stuff. Yeah, it was about creating obedient human beings.
Exactly.
So that you could have a workforce kind of thing.
Exactly.
And so much has changed since that time.
So much.
Yeah. And then I had another podcast that I do. It hasn't come out as regular as I like to, but it's called the Kindness and Compassion podcast. But I interviewed the authors of a book called When You Wonder, You Are Learning. And it's Mr. Rogers' I'm reading it off my screen, Enduring Lessons for Raising Creative, Curious, and Caring Kids. And it's by Greg Baer and Ryan Rodesky. And they were saying exactly the same thing that you're saying, Teva, is that if kids don't have play, if they aren't allowed to be creative, to figure things out, to do all these fun things, it hurts them.
Yeah.
They don't really, they become anxious. They become, just really isolated, all of
Yeah.
those things. And
Yeah.
so, I think you're right on the mark. We really, just thinking about advocating for things, we really need to advocate for changing the way that we're doing what we're doing to kids as far as their learning.
It's true. And
Yeah.
I'm very familiar with that Seth Godin discussion about what is school for.
Yeah.
And I think that is a question we are not asking. We assume that school is to prepare children for maybe a bright career and to help them, gain knowledge. But I would argue that is not happening today. The children are not gaining knowledge. If we look at, literacy and things like that, it's a dinosaur model. Anything we want to know, we can look up. Seth Godin talks about this all the time. We don't have to memorize everything. It's a click away. The joy in learning happens when we are allowed to play with ideas. And school does not permit playing with ideas because school is about getting one right answer. And if you don't get that answer, you are punished.
Yes.
You're punished with a bad grade. And your parents might punish you as well. And you might get detention and you might get held back. And, the late Sir Ken Robinson talks about the future is about problem solving. In order to problem solve, you need to be somewhat of a divergent thinker.
Yes.
School teaches the exact opposite. It teaches a conforming thinker.
Yes.
School punishes divergent thinking. So it's not even that it just discourages divergent thinking. It actually actively punishes divergent thinking. Sir Ken Robinson said that divergent thinking is the baseline for creativity.
Yes.
And schools kill creativity. And problem solving, you do not put a man on the moon if you are not creative.
Exactly.
And we are simply not raising up these kids.
Right.
And it hurts the kids. It hurts society. It takes all the joy out of education. And I'm here for the change.
Yeah.
I'm here for the change.
I'm with you. There was something else about that podcast as you were talking about this that it was a good metaphor, I think, and I'm paraphrasing the metaphor, is that schools are designed to teach kids to memorize how many dots there are, rather than teaching them how to connect the dots.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
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 Mind.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have a link in the show notes here for people to find that podcast as well, because it's a great one. He really is a brilliant thinker and really causes us to think about things in a much different way than we're taught to think or conform. We're made to conform to think. Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah.
We're so rigid.
Yeah,
it's so funny because as therapists, one of the tools in our own toolbox is helping our clients become a little more cognitively flexible.
Yes.
About their own problems, about their approach to solving their problems, about viewing, relationships a certain way and making some changes. It's about flexibility. And we, as the adults, are so rigid.
Yes.
And we teach kids all the time to be flexible. And here we are, so rigid in our thoughts about education.
Right. And it translates into, and the other thing it does is it translates into a lot of anxiety for parents, because there's pressure. Parents feel this pressure to have their kids make good grades in school and to excel in school. And they'll put that pressure on their kids to start at an early age. And I just think about my daughter when we were growing up. We felt that we bought into that idea that she had to, do well and do all the AP courses and all of that kind of thing, which she did well. A funny kind of anecdote, and I'm so proud of my daughter. She is now teaching kindergartners and first graders at what is called the Waihatchee Forest School in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And she is outside with the kids all day, playing in the creeks and doing all the play. And that is the whole focus of that particular school.
I love it. Oh, I'd love to talk with your daughter. That's my jam. I love that. And that's developmentally aligned.
Yes.
That is developmentally aligned. And that is going to raise a child who is mentally well, a child who maintains their curiosity and their love of learning, and their ability to think outside of the box and be creative. And it's just, I can't even stop listing all the positive qualities that can come from that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And I was going to say, so what your daughter is doing is absolutely wonderful for children. And sometimes teens get left out of this conversation.
Yes.
And the thing about being developmentally aligned for teens is teens need to feel useful. Teens really, and I'm with John Taylor Gatto on this one, the late John Taylor Gatto, who was a public school teacher in New York City and has some very controversial thoughts on education. But he says, teens need to feel useful, and teens should be learning out in their communities in more of an apprenticeship model. They should not be glued to a desk for 4 years of some of their best years of their youth. Like he says, children should not be institutionalized for 13 years. Like when we really look at it, it's an institution. And I say, open up the classroom doors and free the children, frankly, with programs like what your daughter is teaching, and then programs like apprenticeship models as a teen. Some teens really are college bound. They're getting ready to be doctors and engineers. And their path of learning is going to look different from the future entrepreneur, like the Seth Godin, or the future person who's going to install your air conditioning or build the extension on your house.
Yes.
There's more than one way. And that's what I love about a homeschool approach, is because you can give your children a truly individualized education that sets them up for a bright future. Right. Yeah. And protects their mental health.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's a good segue to talk about, the things that you're working on now. So tell us about that and your courses and kind of your work with parents.
Sure. I would love to. So I created a course for parents, an online course for parents, because what I found was I was consulting and coaching parents, and they would have the same questions. And my hourly fee is not cheap, put it frankly. And here I am answering the same question over and over again. So why not put it together in a self-paced online course that is more cost-effective than seeing me live one-to-one, and can help a broader amount of parents who are looking for some change in their child's education. So I made a course. It's called A Therapist's Guide to Homeschool. And it's really about creating a homeschool plan that fosters mental health and development and builds up the protective factors of what science and clinical experience tells us protects children's mental health and builds up their resilience. I draw from the field of positive psychology for a portion of the course. And I also teach parents in that course how to homeschool as a working parent. Because the reality is most of us work. Not all of us can do the traditional homeschool model, which is parent is home, parent is facilitating teaching lessons that look a lot like maybe school at their dining table. Parents are either not interested in that model or they're not available for that model because they have careers. So in the course, I really show parents that there's more than one way. You can do it as a working parent, and here's how. And here's how to do it in a way that really focuses on your child's mental health and development.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
I love that concept, because I think, schools are getting hard for kids. I mean, they're just, like you said, just the school day being so much longer now. And, unfortunately, I think too, some parents are seeing school as a way to kind of babysit their kids, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that's a whole other topic. Well, I won't go down that rabbit hole, but it's wonderful stuff. So tell folks, and I've got to be respectful of your time, Teva, tell folks how they can get in touch with you and find out more about what you've got to offer.
Sure. So they can find me on tevajohnstone.com, my website. All of my course offerings are available on my website, and they can contact me through my website for consulting and coaching if they prefer a live one-to-one model. I also support parents who have autistic children who have lower support needs, or what we might call like level 1 autism. Parents of children who are spirited. So these children are just more intense. They're highly sensitive. They might not have a diagnosis, but we know that parenting them is a little more challenging. So I help these parents too with coaching and consulting. I have a very active, sometimes controversial Instagram account. It's Rebel Parents, rebel.parents, where people can come and say hi. Parents and therapists follow me there.
Awesome. And we'll have links in the show notes and the show summary for folks to find that easily. So, well, Teva, I know we could talk about this topic all day long, but I'm glad you joined me for the podcast. Any parting thoughts before we close things out?
Thank you, Gordon. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you. And you're right. I can just go on and on and on about this. I absolutely love this topic. Closing thoughts. I would say to parents, please don't lose hope. Please don't surrender. Please don't throw up your hands and just surrender to this is just the way it is now for kids. And what am I to do to change it? I would say don't ever let yourself go there, because change is possible. A joyful education is possible. And children's mental health is possible and normal and waiting for us. And so let's not surrender to the crisis.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Teva. So glad I got to know you, and hopefully we can have another conversation here soon. Well, a big thanks to Teva for being on the podcast. I just love these kinds of conversations, and Teva's doing some great work, and I appreciate her and the fact that she's willing to do some of the neat and hard stuff that we need to do to try to make the world better. And I appreciate the work that she's doing. Be sure and check out her things. Again, there you'll find links here in the show notes and the show summary. And I hope to have Teva back on the podcast before too terribly long, because I think this is just really great stuff that she's doing. And also, before you go, be sure and check out our sponsor of the podcast, Therapy Notes. You can go to practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. As I've mentioned before, they are who I use in my practice, and I'm absolutely impressed with what they do. They just make things behind the scenes run so much more smoothly for my practice, particularly with their patient portal and all of the new things that they're adding each and every month. They've got a great library of assessments that you can give to clients, and also the ability to do telehealth right through their platform. So be sure and check them out. practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes, and be sure to try try them out by using the promo code just Gordon, Gordon, and you get 2 months for free by using that promo code when you sign up for their services. And also be sure and check out the Instagram templates we put together. Again, practiceoftherapy.com/instapost. And then also be sure and check out my friend Ashley's Etsy store. You can find out more about it by going to practiceoftherapy.com/mentalhealthwares. And that's mental health, just WEARS. And check out the cool things that she's got going there. Take care, folks, and please join us next week for the big, drumroll please, 300th episode of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Take care. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.